Okay, so today's lesson is called Am I Right? And y'all are going to be learning how to determine the slope of a perpendicular line. So in your workbook, turn to page 311, and you're going to start with your warm-up. Okay, reading the warm-up, it says to determine the reciprocal of each value. The word reciprocal just means the opposite. So when we think reciprocal, we just need to flip our fraction. So for example, say we had the number 55. Well, we know in order to make 55 a fraction, we have to put it over the number 1. In order to find the reciprocal, all I'm going to do to my fraction is to flip it and put my numbers on the opposite side. So instead of 55 over 1, I have 1 over 55. So the reciprocal of 55 will be 1 over 55. So go ahead and pause the video and then practice 1 through 6 on your own. So for your warm-up, you should have got the following answers. So all you have to do, if you had a whole number, you had to put it over the number 1 and then flip your fraction. So you should have got the following answers. Okay, then go ahead and turn to page 313. So page 313 is talking about the slopes of a perpendicular line. And so it says that recall that the perpendicular lines or line segments from a right angle at the point of intersection. Consider the 3 graphs shown. Each shows a line in its rotation 90 degrees about the point, what is also the point of intersection. So looking at the 3 graphs that they gave us on our paper, they want us to answer the questions, are these lines perpendicular to each other? And explain our reasoning. And after finding out if they are perpendicular to each other, they want us to write the equation of each line in its transformations and see what we notice. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the very first one. So perpendicular, the symbol that we're going to use to represent perpendicular is just the upside down T with the box in the corner. So this symbol means perpendicular. So first what we're going to do for each graph is find the equation by finding the slope of each one. So first doing it for graph A. So both of these have a y-intercept of 0, but if I choose one perfect point and the next perfect point, when we go to find our slope for A, I went up 1 and to the right 1. So my slope for graph A is 1 over 1. Then if I do the same thing for A prime, so I'm going to pick this point, and then the next perfect point is the one right after it. And then ask yourself again, how did you get there? So in this case, we went down 1 and to the right 1. So our slope for A prime is -1 because we went down over a positive 1. So we're asking ourselves, are these lines perpendicular to one another? They have to be the negative reciprocal. If they're the negative reciprocal, that means that we flipped our fractions and changed our signs. So far, it's true. So now let's do the same thing with graph B. So finding 2 perfect points. So the first perfect point that I noticed is this one, and then following going up is right by that B. So finding the slope for this line, I have M is equal to, well, I went up 1, so my top number is 1, and then I went 1, 2, 3 to the right. So my slope for B is 1 over 3. Then finding the slope for B prime. So the first perfect point that I see is right here, and then the next perfect point, if I trace that line, is right there. So now finding the slope again M is equal to, where in this case we went down 1, 2, 3 units. So my top number should be a -3. And then from here, I went to the right 1 unit. So it's -3 over 1. Now let's do the same thing with C. With this one, pause the video and practice it by yourself before you move forward, and then check your work. So doing the same thing with C. The first perfect point that I have, I'm going to start at this y-intercept. And then if I trace the line, the next perfect point is right here by that C. So finding the slope for this one, M is equal to, in this case, we went down 1, 2 units. So my top number is a -2, because remember, if you go down, it's negative. Then from this point, we went 1, 2, 3 units to the right. So my bottom number is a +3. So now finding my slope for C prime, M is equal to, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to find 2 perfect points. So I have this one, and then the next perfect point I see is this one. So in this case, our line is increasing, and we went up 1, 2, 3 units. So my top number is a +3. And then we went to the right by 2. So my slope is 3/2. So when we go back to question number 1 and it asks us, are these lines perpendicular, and explain our reasoning? Well, when we look at all of them, they all form a 90 degrees angle. So if you look at them and you turn them, they look 90 degrees. So when we go to answer question number 1 on if all the lines are perpendicular, we can say yes. Because they form a 90-degree angle. And then when we go to question number 2, it says to write the equation of each line and its transformations and to see what do we notice. So when we look at A by itself, our slope was that +1. And if you forgot, then just put your paper back up. But both of my y-intercepts for A and A prime was 0 because they both touch the y-axis at 0. So my equation for A was y equals x. And remember, because your slope is 1 and your y-intercept is 0, you can also write it like that, but you'll always see it as y equals x. But the equation for A prime was y equals, when you go back up, A prime was this one with a little dash mark. It was a -1, was our slope. So we had -1x plus 0. Then doing the same thing for B. So ask yourself, what was the equation for the line of B? So we had y equals, well, our slope was 1/3 x. And then when we go and look at the graph, both of them had a y-intercept of a +5 this time. So we had y equals 1/3 x plus 5. And then B prime was y equals a -3, because remember, if a number is over the number 1, it simplifies to just that number at the top. So we had -3x plus 5. Now pause the video and try to write equation C and C prime. So for C, you should have had the following 2 equations. So now looking at all 3 equations, what do you notice about the difference from the original one to the transformed one? So A, B, and C prime. If you notice, the main thing that changed between them is the slope. It was pretty much the same numbers, but it was as if we flipped the fractions and changed the signs. So if you said something similar to that, then you're on the right track. So what you noticed was pretty much called the perpendicular or the negative reciprocal of the slope. The negative reciprocal slope, if you look on the next page, they broke it down in a long way, but the perpendicular slope is just whatever the original slope was, but you're going to flip the fraction and change the sign. So look at the bottom of page 315. They say line J and line K are perpendicular. So remember, the symbol for perpendicular is that upside down T with the box on it. They want us to give each slope of line J and determine the slope of it. So they gave us the slope already, but they want us to determine the number. So if we're looking for the perpendicular slope, remember it's the opposite, negative reciprocal. So whatever your original slope is, to find the perpendicular one, the first thing that you need to do is flip your fraction. So instead of 2 over 3, it becomes 3 over 2. The second thing you have to do is change your sign. So in this case, we have a positive 3 over 2. But if we change the sign, the opposite of a positive is a negative. So we have negative 3 over 2. So the perpendicular slope, so remember this symbol means perpendicular and M still represents slope. So the perpendicular slope is that negative 3 over 2. So again, in order to find your perpendicular slope, take your original slope, flip the fraction. After you flip the fraction, you're going to change your sign. So if it's positive, it becomes a negative number. If it's a negative, then it becomes a positive number. And that's going to give you your perpendicular slope. So now pause the video and find your perpendicular slope for B and C. So for B and C, for B you should have got 5 over 4, and for C you should have got 1 over 3. So again, take your original slope, flip the fraction, so it became 5 over that negative 4, and then change the sign. So instead of negative, it became positive. If you ever have both numbers negative, remember that makes a positive number. Okay, the next thing that we have is horizontal and vertical lines for 7.2. That's on page 316. So the only thing that we need to take away from this page is the slopes of a horizontal and a vertical line. So first, it wants us to describe the slope of a horizontal line. So remember, slope is still M, and then horizontal goes which way? Left to right or up and down? Left to right. The trick when it comes to a horizontal line is that if your line goes left to right, then you can spell out the word 0 with it. So if your line goes left to right, then you have a slope of 0. So M will equal 0. Now, if horizontal goes left to right, then vertical goes which way? Up and down. So the trick with a vertical line is that if it goes up and down, then we can make the letter U and spell out undefined. So if you ever type it into decimals or your calculator, you'll get an error for your slope. Because think about it like this, you cannot walk up a wall, so your slope is going to be undefined. So that's the only thing that we are taking away from 7.2. So now 7.3 on page 318 is talking about writing the equation of a perpendicular line. So make sure that you pay attention with this one. If you need to replay a part of this video, then do so, because this is what your assignment is really going to be over. So in the previous lesson, we wrote the equation of a line that's parallel and it passes through a given point. Now we're going to do the same thing with a line that's perpendicular to another one. So the first one that we're going to look at is question number 1. So question number 1 says to write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to y equals 2x plus 1 and it passes through the point 6, 2. Because we're writing it up in a line that's perpendicular to it, that means that these two lines need to pretty much cross at a 90 degrees angle, just like those first 3 graphs that we looked at. In order to do that, the first thing that we need to do is find our perpendicular slope. So if my original slope from the equation is 2, in order to find our perpendicular slope, all I have to do is flip my fraction. So instead of 2 over 1, I have 1 over 2, and then change my sign. So instead of a positive number, it now becomes a negative number. Then they gave us a point. So now ask yourself, if you have a point and a slope, which equation should you use? So remember, it's up in the name, point slope. So we should be using the point slope formula. We don't have to make things harder than what it is. So remember, the point slope formula is y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1, where your x and your y1 represents that given point that they gave us, and your m represents your slope. But in this case, it's going to represent our perpendicular slope because we're writing the line that's perpendicular to the one that they gave us. So filling in the stuff that we know. Remember, you need 3 things in order to use the point slope formula. You need to know the slope. So in this case, we need to know the perpendicular slope, which we already know. Then we need to know what number is x1 and what number is y1. So looking at the order pair that they gave us, our x1 is 6 and our y1 is 2. So now I'm going to plug it into my equation, exactly how I see it. But remember, when you plug it in, it has to be in parentheses. So y minus my y1 is the number 2, is equal to our perpendicular slope is that negative half. X minus x1 is that positive 6. So then just to practice, we can stop here. But remember, if these were negative numbers, then our sign becomes positive. But we can also practice with solving for y. So if we were solving for y, the first thing that we would have to do is to distribute. So negative half times x is going to give us a negative half x. And then a negative half times a negative 6 is going to give us a positive 3. We had no parentheses on this side, so just bring it down. Our next step is to combine like terms. But on the left-hand side, I can't combine these two because they're not alike. And then over here, I have nothing to combine because they're also not alike. So then my third thing to do is move. I'm trying to put my equation in point slope intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. So I'm solving for y. In order to get y by itself, the only thing I need to move to the other side is this negative 2. So I need to add 2 to both sides. So I end up getting y equals a negative half x. 3 plus 2 gives us a positive 5. So now pause the video and practice the same thing with question number 2. You don't have to solve the equation for y, but practice writing it in point slope form and making sure that you simplify it out correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead and try number 2. So write the equation of the line perpendicular to y equals a -3/4x that passes through the point 3, -8. So again, if we're writing the line that's perpendicular to what they gave us, the first thing that we need to identify is our perpendicular slope. So my original slope here is this -3/4. So in order to find your perpendicular slope, we first need to flip this fraction. So instead of 3/4, a -3/4, it becomes a -4/3. And then change the sign. So instead of a negative number, it's going to be positive. So our perpendicular slope is 4/3. Then we have a slope, and they gave us a point. So our x1 is equal to 3, and our y1 is equal to a -8. So now we need to plug it into the point slope formula. So we have y minus y1 is equal to the perpendicular slope times x minus our x1. So filling in the parentheses. So y minus y1, because remember we're using this original equation. So we're using that original equation. My y1 is the number -8. So remember, always take the sign that's in front of your number, and when you substitute it in, write it inside of parentheses. Is equal to our perpendicular slope, which is this 4/3, times x minus x1 is the number 3. So now simplifying this out, remember we cannot have a negative and a negative back to back. So our final answer, because remember a negative times a negative, because this, if no number is there, it's a 1, but in this case it's a -1. So -1 times a -8 is a +8. So this simplifies to y plus 8 is equal to 4/3 times x minus 3. So this is your final answer. Now let's look at number 3. So number 3 says write the equation of a line that passes through the point 6, 2 and is perpendicular to the line that passes through the points -5, 3 and -1, -9. So looking at question 3, ask yourself what's different compared to the first two that we just did. So compared to the first two that we just did, this one didn't give us the equation for us to just pull our slope out. So anytime it doesn't give you the equation, you have to find your original slope. So it said that the perpendicular line passes through these 2 points. So with these 2 points, remember, anytime you have 2 points, what can you do with these points? You should be able to write them in the table. So I'm going to make my table. So x, y, -5, 3, -1, -9. Now, anytime I have a table, you should remember that I'm able to put my table into decimals. So go ahead and put your table into decimals so you can find what the original slope was. So if you forgot, up in Google, type in testing decimals. And then click on the second link that pops up. So your bar at the top, remember, should be green. So to get your table, hit the plus sign, hit table. It should say x1 and y1, and go ahead and type your numbers in. After you type your numbers in, remember, in order for any information to pop up, you have to type your linear regression equation in. So remember, it's y, the number 1. To get your squiggly line, hit the gray keyboard, ABC, and it's at the bottom. And then mx, the number 1, plus b. So now we see that our information pops up, and my original slope is a -3. So go ahead and write that on your paper. Now remember, we're trying to still find the equation of the line that's perpendicular to the one that we just found. So we need to identify what our perpendicular slope is. So if our original slope is a -3, what is your perpendicular slope? 1/3. And because they gave us points, but our new slope is supposed to go through this 6,2, this is the x1 and the y1 that we're going to use for this problem. So x1 is equal to 6 and y1 is equal to 2. So now we can go ahead and use our point slope formula again. So we're going to have y minus y1 is equal to our perpendicular slope times x minus x1. So y minus y1 was the number 2 is equal to our perpendicular slope. So 1/3 parentheses, so times x minus x1, which is 6. So now looking at your equation, I have no negatives back to back, so I have nothing to simplify. So this is my final answer in point slope form. You can take it a step further and solve for y, but you don't have to do the extra work. So now pause your video and try number 4 on your own before you continue going forward. Okay, so you should have tried it on your own before going ahead. So number 4 is just like number 3. So write the equation of a line that passes through the point -2,7 and is perpendicular to the line that passes through the points -6,1 and 0,4. So these 2 points I know are the ones that I need to make my table with. So now put your table into Desmos and find your original slope. So on Desmos, all I did was change my numbers. I didn't restart or anything, just change your numbers. But if you do restart, make sure that it still says x1 and y1. When you go down, you see that your slope is that 0.5. I'm going to write my slope as a fraction. So remember to write it as a fraction. All you need to do is type the decimal in. And then when that fraction icon comes up, tap it. So 0.5 is 1/2 as a fraction. So our original slope is 1/2. But remember, we're looking for the perpendicular slope to be using. So what is your perpendicular slope? So you should have got a -2/1. But remember, if it's over 1, it just simplifies to a -2. We're using this first point to use in our equation. So your x1 in this case is a -2 and your y1 is that 7. So now plugging it into your equation, we have y minus y1, but in parentheses, I have the number 7 is equal to my perpendicular slope, which is -2, times x minus, in parentheses, I have my x1, which is a -2. So anytime you substitute your numbers in, remember to always put it inside of parentheses. So then simplify your equation. So at the front, I have nothing to simplify because I have no 2 negative signs right behind each other. However, when I look over here, I have 2 negatives by each other. So remember, 2 negatives by each other, you can make a plus sign with it, so it becomes a plus. So we have -2 times x plus 2. So this is our equation that is perpendicular to the original one that they gave us. Okay, the last problem that we have is number 5. It says that a pair of perpendicular lines intersect at the point 5, -9. Write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to the line that also passes through the point -4, 4. Now with this one, they only gave us 2 points. But if you read it carefully and you reread it over, it says that the two pair of perpendicular lines intersect at this point. So this is going to be the ordered pair that you use for your x1 and your y1. So we already know that x1 is going to be 5 and y1 is going to be 9. We only have 2 points for question number 5. So with these 2 points, we need to go ahead and make a table and put that table into decimals to identify what our original slope was so we can find our perpendicular slope. So go ahead and find your slope and your perpendicular slope. So putting those 2 points into decimals, I see that my slope is this 0.55 repeating. So remember, anytime you have the same number repeating and then they round the very last one, it's a repeating decimal. So if your decimal is repeating, then we need to see what it is as a fraction, a simplified fraction. So type 0.5 and keep typing 5. So you see the fraction icon comes up, but it's not just 0.5. I have repeating 5, so I need to keep hitting the number 5 until I get a smaller fraction. So now after I type, I don't know how many 5s, we see that it reduced to 5 over 9. So the original slope for the last problem was 5 over 9. My perpendicular slope, so if I flip it, it becomes 9 over 5. And then change the sign, instead of positive, it became a negative 9 over 5. So now with the 3 information that I have, I can go ahead and write the equation. So y minus my y1, remember, goes inside of parentheses, is the number 9, is equal to my perpendicular slope, which is negative 9 over 5, times x minus my x1, but always write it in parentheses, and x1 was a positive 5. And then close it. So then simplify your equation. So in this case, we don't have any negatives back to back. So this is my final answer. The last thing you have is your assignment, and it is the sheet of paper that says determining the slope of perpendicular lines, and it should have been at the front for you to pick up. So just like we practiced with those last 5 problems, on this paper is the same type of practice, except for some of them you may have to solve for y. And when you solve for y, you need to show your work. So first thing first, make sure that you put your first, last name, and class period at the very top of the paper. Okay, looking at question number 1. So it says to determine an equation that represents each perpendicular line. You can write your answer in point slope form, slope intercept form, or standard form. But all of your answers, because they're going to give you a perpendicular slope and a point, we're going to be practicing with writing it in point slope form. So looking at question number 1. And it looks just like the examples from the book that we just did. It wants us to write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to y equals 2x minus 6 that passes through the point 5, 4. So the original equation they gave us, y equals 2x minus 6, is in slope-intercept form. And slope-intercept form is the one that's right above it. So that very first number I know represents my slope. So my original slope is the number 2. So m is a 2. But to make it a fraction, remember it needs to go over 1. Because in order for us to find the perpendicular slope, it needs to be a fraction. So then take your number, flip it, and change the sign. So if I flip it, my perpendicular slope Instead of 2 over 1, it becomes 1 over 2. Instead of a positive fraction, it becomes a negative fraction. So my perpendicular slope is that negative 1 over 2. Then they gave us an ordered pair of 5, 4. So remember, anytime you have an ordered pair, whatever that first number is represents x1, and whatever that second number is represents y1. So my x1 is the number 5, and my y1 is the number 4. So now using these three things, because you have a point and you have a slope, so you should be using point slope form. So you have y minus y1 is equal to your perpendicular slope times x minus x1. So using this outline, go ahead and fill it in correctly with the correct numbers. So the equation that we're using, remember, is y minus y1 is equal to the perpendicular slope times x minus x1. So this is the equation that you're using for all of them. So that you can finish the rest of your assignment. So when you look at question number 2, you're still doing the same thing for all of the examples, which is writing the equation of the line that's perpendicular to whatever they gave you. So in this case, they gave you the equation 3x plus y is equal to 4, and it passes through that point, negative 1, 6. In this case, when you look at this equation, it's in standard form. So remember, standard form is that very last one where x and y is on the same side. So the first thing you need to do for number 2 is solve this equation for your y. So I have 3x plus y is equal to 4. My goal is to get y by itself and to make it look like y equals mx plus b, which means this 3x does not belong on this side. It needs to go to the other side of the equal sign. So whenever you move it, remember it's the opposite of what it is. So if this is a positive 3x, I need to subtract 3x. And what I do to one side, I need to do to the other. But notice I wrote it off to the side because these two are not the same term. So 3x minus 3x canceled. Your y came down. And it's equal to whichever number has the variable x attached to it needs to go first. So minus 3x plus 4. So if your number is positive, remember to put that plus sign behind it. If it's negative, then make your plus sign a negative. So now using this equation, you should be able to identify and find your perpendicular slope. They gave you the point, so identify what number is your x1 and what number is your y1 and write it in to your equation. If you have to simplify, then remember to simplify. So you have a negative and a negative back to back. Remember that you have to simplify your equation. You can't have a negative and a negative back to back. So pause the video wherever you need to. Then look at question number 3. So question number 3 is the same thing, but our equation, we can pull our slope directly out of it, and they gave us the point. So for this one, you just need to find your perpendicular slope, then use your perpendicular slope, your x1 and your y1 to plug into the point slope formula. Then for question number 4, is similar to question number 2. Your equation that they gave you is in standard form. So you need to move your x over to the other side, then divide by that number that's attached to your y. Then identify your x1 and your y1 and plug it into your formula. Then for number 5, you don't have to do any work to your equation. So identify your original slope to find the perpendicular slope. They gave you your x1 and your y1, plug it into your formula and simplify. Then do the same thing with number 6. So number 6, you have y minus 4 is equal to 5 over 2 times x minus 2. And they also gave you 1 point. But this equation looks like point slope. So if this is point slope, the number that's in the same spot as m is your original slope. So going from there, you can pull your original slope out the equation to get your perpendicular slope and use your x1 and your y1 to plug into your equation. When you are done with this assignment, make sure that your name, class period is on it and put it into the turn-in tray. And for your final answers, make sure to box your final answer. That way I don't have to guess to see what your final answer is.